and understand that. But sometimes it's easier to apply in certain aspects than in others, especially when you're putting yourself out there and promoting and trying to get people more aware of your game. That becomes a lot more fearful than just trying things individually or as a team and being like, okay, that didn't work, and moving on from that. But even if you're getting out there, it's going to happen one way or another. But the more important thing when you're looking to try new things and knowing that there is that potential of failing is look at it from a learning experience, not from a failure experience. Because, that'd be the best thing I could say on top of what you mentioned in terms of, trying new things. It's worth it. You can expand your audience, like you said, and everything else, but it might not work. But you know what? It's way better. You're going to fail even greater if you don't try those things, because then you have the experience to prepare you for everything else that you're going to face as you grow and build that foundation.
And the great news is, for better or for worse, the audience that game developers tend to work with most frequently are absolutely the types of people that will give you feedback. So
yep.
If nothing else, you'll learn what works and what didn't, and of course you'll learn for who it works for over against who it may not work for.
Yeah, and I think a good kind of to take us to the next topic too is that kind of relates to this a little bit. It's almost the opposite in some ways, but being in a position or not being in or positioning yourself where you're not saying no to things. So, and the reason why I'm saying that is let's say for someone who isn't afraid to try new things and they're doing a lot of different things and stuff too, where I think sometimes that can catch some people off guard. It's great to have that level of energy and everything else, but you don't want to get burned out. And so that's why not saying no to things at times, or learning how to say no to things is really an important thing, because I think what happens is, and it's really easy to understand this, is that especially with small teams, is that people, developers, they'll handle anything and everything, especially when it's themselves or a small team, because who else is going to handle it, right? And I think and that makes complete sense. In a lot of cases, you are, especially for those solo devs and people with small teams, there is going to be a lot where you are doing everything. But what I mean more generally when talking about not saying no to things is literally everything. So, people have lives and other things else like that. Sometimes you're going to have to make risks or sacrifices in where you might not be able to hang out with friends as much as you would like to, or those types of things. Or you're just involved with things that aren't really just helpful in being productive in the grand scheme of things, not just with work and making your game, but also just productive from a lifestyle perspective. And the reason why learning how to say no to certain things, and I guess what I'm really saying is saying no to distractions is a good way of probably rephrasing it, is because by saying no to certain things is going to allow you to be more focused. And then when you see how you can become more productive, and it's not just going to be your development, it's probably going to be in other areas of your life too. But when you see, you'll become more focused. You'll probably have more intent with things. And there's a lot of very empowering things that can come from that. So that's why I thought it was really important to even work in saying no to things, because the more you say no, the more focused you can be. And it's just going to be really beneficial from that. But it's not something that I think a lot of people talk about. So that's why I thought it was really important to mention.
Yeah, smaller teams especially really have to consider how they kind of manage their and moderate their ambition. Scope, I think, is typically fairly make or break. And so I think as indie devs, your responsibility kind of falls more to being able to do fewer things well than to do more things. So that's why I think we find a lot of successful indie games typically focus on one or two main mechanics. It's why they're usually they very much lean into being more stylized. A lot of this is a matter of taking the things that you can do effectively and really, really ramping those up. And then anything else, it's just if you happen to have the time for it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So And I want to go into our next topic here because I know we're coming close on time for a little bit, but another one that I think is super important, and sometimes people might not even realize that they're doing this, is not being involved. And it's kind of funny, like hearing that, because for some people listening, they might be like, "Well, obviously I'm involved. It's just me, or it's just my me and a few other people." But what I mean by that more than anything is, having a limited understanding of marketing or your business, bottom line numbers, or even in some cases, not having tabs on their team. And I'm not saying that from a perspective of like micromanagement or anything like that. And I'll give a quick story from personal experience I had with working with a past client where they were very big on people operating autonomously, and rightfully so, right? I mean, part of about like scaling and doing everything else is having a level of autonomy with your team, which is very important. But in this particular instance, what happened was I had a contact that was designated to me to coordinate campaigning efforts and things like that. But what happened was just there was no real chain of communication with anybody or that contact. So I was reaching out to the company owner, and they're like, "Why aren't you talking to this person?" And then letting them know that I haven't heard from them in like weeks, and then he didn't know why. So basically, there's this big breakdown in communication, which is really unfortunate. But it just goes to show that even when you're really focused on certain things with your team and having that level of autonomy, it's important. But if there's no communication there or whatever, and I think what ultimately happened was just these individuals weren't necessarily as involved as they needed to be, and that's why that breakdown occurred. But on the other front too, not understanding your marketing, just saying kind of in the same situation, like, "Oh, I have a marketing team. Oh, I have a publisher," or, "Oh, I have whatever handling this aspect of marketing. I don't need to worry about it." If it's your business and you're one of the founders or whatever, you need to be involved. It doesn't mean you have to be the one making Twitter posts or doing paid advertising or whatever your marketing strategy consists of. It just means you need to have a pulse on it and a brief understanding, because you don't want to work with a potential partner or someone who's saying all this stuff and you're like, "I have no clue what they're doing, but it sounds great," because there could be mistakes that they might be making, or that it's not necessarily aligning with how things should be in terms of like the overall vision and things like that, where you might kind of find when it's too late, like, "Oh, I didn't expect that to happen," or whatever. And I mean, it just comes down to communication and being on the same page with people. But that's why I think it's always really important when it comes to being involved, or even bottom line numbers, as I mentioned before too. Because if you're like spending money like crazy, and then next thing you know, you're like, "Oh, we went way beyond budget," but you're the guy who makes all the decisions, or the gal, and then they're like, "Oh," it's like it's not going to be beneficial. So always have a pulse. Be involved. It doesn't mean you have to do everything. There's a lot of chances you might be doing a lot of that too, but even if you are or not, make sure you're involved to some level. Get that understanding. Keep tabs on people and everything else. Yeah.
I think people have like kind of anxiety surrounding some of the hard skills when it comes to like the business management aspect of running your studio.
Right.
But if that's the case, if that's something that you truly are 100% averse to, there are people out there whose entire career is just to make that information more readable for you. So, get help if you need it. If that's what it takes to have you still be plugged into that information that is incredibly relevant to the success of your team, then utilize that. Realize that like other people have skill sets that you can leverage.
Yeah. And the other thing too, some people might be asking from that, because that's one of the main things I'd highly recommend is like hire someone or work with someone or whatever. Maybe you already have a community built that's really well, and there's a moderator or someone who's like your super fan, and maybe they're that person that can help out to it. There's any number of things you can do. Maybe spend 15 minutes a day, maybe a little bit more time prior to that, and subscribe to some type of maybe not necessarily it could be an email list. It could be a feed that you get from a particular publication, whatever. I use something I'll put in the show notes called zest.something. And basically all I do is I open a new tab and it gives me anything marketing related to the subjects that I want, and it's all curated content in front of me. I don't look at it all the time, but every now and then something pops up, and that's one less thing I have to do for searching all over the web for this content. It makes my life so much easier if I need to do things like that. There's all little things, very different styles and stuff depending on how you learn that you can do to be involved. And if you don't have that, but you do have the luxury or the ability to get help from someone else that can kind of maybe be a member on your team, or even if it's like on a very you hire someone for a couple hours a month to help you out with some of those things, that's a great alternative too. Lots of different ways you can go about doing that. So as Mustapha said, and we as well, just like getting involved is definitely important. Yeah, and then for the last part, before we start to close here, I would say is one other thing that's kind of interesting too, that in the same vein of like, not saying no to things, is not letting go. And what I mean by that, and this is a very, very natural thing for everyone, especially when you're working on a project, is, wanting to take control of everything, and rightfully so, understandably so, and even relates on what we were just mentioning about like potentially hiring people too, because this is your baby, this is your main project, regardless if it's your first or third, project game that you're working on. It's something really important to you, and sometimes learning to let go of aspects of those projects can be quite a challenge. And in other cases, it can be very, very open-armed because it's like, I want less to do. I can't like manage all these aspects of the business that I want to do. But still, like looking at it and understanding what that is, and really taking the time to understand and of how important it is to let go of those certain aspects and stuff, because taking control of everything is just a good way towards, burning out. And a lot of times you probably see this more happen less in the earlier stages, but more towards the later stages of your development. But it's good to at least get in that mindset, know where to take, less of that control, whatever. And it still goes back to, again, what we're talking about with saying no to things. Because by doing that, you're going to be able to be more focused with your intent and everything else. And then it just helps, not just you, but the team and the project really succeed by developing that mindset early on, and then being able to apply it without any reservations as you move forward. Anything else you would want to add to that, Mustapha?
No, right. I mean, I think you touched on everything. That's the biggest challenge of being an artist or creator of any kind, is that like you have to accept that if you want to be successful, there's always a compromise of what you want to make and what people want to play or read or watch. So everything is not going to be exactly the way you envisioned it. You have to have some willingness to compromise, unless and I don't want this to sound backhanded, but genuinely, unless the profit is not really what's important to you, like if you're a hobbyist or if you're making a game because you want to make the game that you've envisioned, that's fine.
Right.
But if you're looking for something that you want to have a market and you want to create a sustainable environment for you to be able to keep making games, mm-hmm. then yeah, you have to compromise. That's a non-negotiable. It's just part of the process.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so before we wrap up, and just a reminder, in a moment we are going to get to that, that free thing that we mentioned for you guys, for everyone. But before we get to that, we're going to go into some of the main takeaways that we have from this episode, because I know we talked about a lot, and it's probably a lot to kind of compress and filter here and everything. But here are some things that we have thought of that would be really helpful and from all this discussion. So, Mustapha, I'll let you take it away with the first one.
Yeah. So, first, and we did mention this earlier, have a holistic mindset. You should be open-minded, adaptable, and confident in your decisions.
Yeah, because like if you don't take that approach to everything,